Doug. By Sara Brooke. It hadn't been there yesterday. He was certain of it. He had walked right by the same exact spot noon the day prior, while quickly chewing on a hamburger before the lunch hour ran out. A burger with only ketchup and mayonnaise. The way he liked it. The building had been vacant. He knew this because he liked to stare at himself in the dull, empty windows as he walked by, watching the reflective sway of his hips as he strolled down the sidewalk. But now, only 29 hours later, Gary Jones was staring at a colorfully painted pet store, fully furnished, and sporting a cute terrier puppy in the glass-enclosed window. A sign with the word pets adorned the entranceway in bright red letters. It was impossible to miss. And yet, it hadn't been there yesterday. Gary Jones was a lonely guy. In his mid-30s he was still searching. Women were a mystery to him and seemed to be put off by his awkward ways and clumsy mannerisms. Not unattractive, Gary was simply, well, simple. And that just didn't go over real well in the bustling city of Miami, where women were looking for rich, handsome, and not simple. So, staring at the strange new pet store that clearly seemed to have appeared overnight, he had one simple desire. I'd like a pet, he thought. But not just any pet. He wanted to start small. Maybe work his way up to a larger pet like a cat or dog. As he opened the front door, friendly chimes welcomed his entrance. Inside, the pet store was painted a bright yellow. The sole employee, a large jovial man with a distinct pencil-thin mustache, smiled widely as he entered. Hi there. The pet store worker boomed. Can I help you with anything? Well, I'm looking for a pet. But I was thinking about something small. Do you have any fish? The man laughed, a loud sound that made Gary a bit uneasy. Fish? We've got tons of fish. Come over here and take a look. Indeed, the store had a vast array of fish consisting of different species, colors, and lengths. Their slick bodies quivered and glided across large aquariums filled with plastic treasure chests and bubbling with miniature scuba divers. Gary scanned the tanks until he found the perfect fish. It was golden and fat, with a long, elegant flowing tail that swayed gently as it easily swam back and forth, as if showing off. I want that one, Gary said, pointing to the fish. Aha! You like goldfish, eh? Well, that's a great choice. Goldfish make good pets and they can live a long time if treated right. The man reached into the tank with a plastic bag and captured the fish inside. He then helped Gary pick out a smaller fish tank and provided direction regarding the proper water quality, food, and maintenance. When all was said and done, Gary forked over $100. Way more than he had expected to pay for a simple fish. It's an investment, smiled the man as he handed over the change. By the way, my name's Herman Bobby. I own this shop and you, my friend, are my first customer. So, to say thank you, I'll throw in an extra filter for free. Gary smiled and thanked Herman for the gift. As he turned to go, armed with a number of bags and his new pet, he remembered to ask, Hey, how fast did you get this place together? I could have sworn it wasn't here yesterday. Herman smiled. It doesn't take long to get set up, when you know what you're doing. Back in his one-bedroom apartment, Gary set up the fish tank on the counter near the kitchen and stared at his new golden friend. The fish seemed to stare back at him with large black eyes as it swam slowly back and forth. I'll call you Doug, he said, quite pleased with his decision. Gary went to his refrigerator to select the frozen carton that would serve as dinner. Pulling out a box with a photo of spaghetti on it, he set the microwave to 4 minutes on medium heat and continued to watch Doug swim around. Staring at the fish, he realized that it had gotten bigger somehow in the past hour. That's impossible, he thought. But the fish did indeed appear to be larger, its mouth opening and closing with silent toes as it swam back and forth staring at him with mild interest. Peering closely at the fish, he noticed how it had golden scales running along its body that were reflective, almost glowing in the dim light of the room. It was eerily beautiful and Gary found himself staring at the hypnotic rhythms of the fish as it familiarized itself with the small tank. His cell phone rang, breaking his train of thought. The name on his caller ID said Mom. Oh, great, he thought. This is going to take forever. His mother, who lived about 15 minutes away in North Miami Beach, had a habit of talking nonstop and lecturing him about any respective topic he was brave enough to address. Now, she was lecturing him about his new pet. Honey, she was saying, be sure not to overfeed your new fish. They really aren't supposed to eat more than a pinch or two, and you've got to make sure you change the water once a week. As she rambled on and on, Gary looked back at the tank. His heart stopped as he focused in on Doug. The fish was now floating directly across from him and seemed to be staring. It was unnerving to see his new pet floating in place, still as a stone. Just gazing at him. And damn it! He looks bigger. Again. How is that possible? Mom, I've got to go. I'll call you back later, Gary said, putting the cell phone down on the table, not waiting for a response. Walking over to the tank, he tapped on the glass, which sent Doug swimming in the other direction. It was hard to tell, but the fish did look bigger. Its scales seemed larger and more reflective than just moments ago. His heart pounding now, Doug carefully picked up the tank and headed to his car. Something wasn't right here, and he needed to talk to Herman. His new pet was growing larger by the minute, and either he was hallucinating from hunger, his spaghetti still sitting in the microwave, getting cold, or the stress of getting a new pet was making him see things. Either way, he needed to understand what was happening. As he drove back to the pet store, the water sloshed around in the fish tank from the movement of the car. Doug stayed close to the bottom as if fearful that swimming too close to the top might put him in danger of falling out if the vehicle turned sharply. Gary pulled into an empty spot near the store and, picking up the tank from the passenger seat, walked quickly to the front doors. To his disappointment, the store was now closed. It was 7 p.m. and the pet shop closed at 6:30 p.m. Damn, he thought. Now I'll have to wait until this place opens in the morning. Returning to the car, he considered dumping Doug in the grass and tossing the tank into a nearby bin. But something held him back. The fish was his pet, his responsibility, and if he couldn't handle a simple goldfish, how would he ever get involved in a relationship and eventually have kids? A fish was nothing compared to the real-world commitments that lie ahead. Buck up and do this, his inner strength commanded. Don't end that poor bugger's life just because you're a wuss. Shaking off his fear and concern, Gary put Doug in the tank back on the passenger seat and drove home to the apartment. Once inside, he returned the fish tank to the counter and remembered that he hadn't yet fed his new pet. Do I really want to feed this thing? It seems to be growing larger by the minute, he thought. But another voice, one that sounded strangely like his mother, began chiding him that starving his first real pet would not be a good thing to do. So, reaching into the small canister of strong-smelling fish food, Gary took a pinch out, like he'd seen Herman do, and sprinkled the red flakes along the surface of the water. Before he knew what was happening, Doug jumped out of the water and bit his finger as it slightly grazed the water's edge. Ouch! Gary shouted, jumping back from the tank. Shaking his finger, which actually hurt, he noticed there was a small drop of blood on the tip. What the fuck? He asked aloud. Fish don't have teeth. How the hell did Doug just bite me? Peering closely at the glass, Gary could see that the fish was now greedily sucking up all of the flakes on the surface, like a miniature vacuum cleaner. Back and forth, he swam until all of the food was gone. Then, Doug slowed his pace until he was once again casually floating along the bottom of the tank. Gary positioned himself so that he could look carefully into the fish's mouth, but there was no visible sign of teeth, just darkness. Annoyed, tired, hungry, and ready for some time away from his new pet, Gary tossed the tray full of cold spaghetti into the garbage and grabbed a candy bar. He then flopped down on the couch, grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, searching for some good reality television. He didn't like to admit it to others, but there were some great reality shows on cable. He loved when people fought and fucked on reality TV. It was always amusing to see how crappy other people's lives could get, and made him feel better about his own boring situation. He was thrilled to see that one of his favorites was on and settled back to watch it. It turned out to be a show marathon, and by the third episode, his eyes were beginning to close. Slowly, he felt his body relax and his eyelids droop. Splash, splash, splash. Opening his eyes, Gary became aware of a continuous splashing sound. Groggily, he lifted up his head and turned to look at the tank. Holy Mother of God! Doug had grown and was now the size of a small baseball. He was bumping up against the glass repeatedly, and each time, sent a small spray of water into the air from the impact. The water moved in waves as the creature pushed up against the wall over and over again. Rising carefully, Gary kept his eyes on the tank and slowly moved toward the fish. Doug noticed his new owner approaching and stopped banging against the tank. Instead, he stilled and floated to the center, carefully watching and gulping water into an enlarged mouth. Gary's heart was pounding now, and small drops of sweat emerged along the edges of his forehead. He wasn't sure exactly how much food he'd given the fish, but certainly not enough to make it grow this fast. Maybe Doug was sick and was bloating from the inside out. Maybe he had some sort of fish disease that caused his stomach to enlarge. What if he grows until he explodes in the tank? Damn that Herman Boppy, he thought. This is all his fault. He sold me some faulty, fucked up fish. Pulling his laptop out, Gary turned it on and began to search for strange fish diseases. All sorts of different conditions popped up, but none of them came close to what he was seeing in his apartment. And some of the websites appeared to be fiction, written by seriously disturbed people who had abnormal fish fetishes. Too weird. Walking back to the tank, he watched Doug, who was now barely able to swim around due to his size. He can't be comfortable, Gary thought. Maybe I need to move him to a larger tank. Searching around the cabinets, he was able to find a large plastic tub that he used while mopping the floor. Considering that he only cleaned his floors when his mother visited him, the tub was in relatively good shape. It was large, but cloudy, the plastic a milky white. Maybe that's better. Maybe not seeing that damned fish swimming around will help me calm my nerves, helping me think more clearly. Filling the tub with water, Gary treated it with the chemicals that Herman had told him made the water fish ready. He had to estimate how many drops to put in, given the size of the tub and his expanding pet. So, he squeezed on the vial and watched as a slow stream of chemicals flowed out. When he felt comfortable, he stopped squeezing and shook the tub to help circulate the chemicals within the water. Then, it was time to lift the smaller tank and drop Doug inside. With shaking hands, he lifted the smaller fish tank. Doug eyed him coldly and rose to the surface, almost coming eye level to his new owner. With horror, Gary could see that the creature's body appeared to be pulsing underneath the water. As quickly as possible, he dumped the entire concoction, fish included, into the tub. The creature hit the water with a loud splash. Totally freaked out now, Gary dropped the fish tank on the counter and quickly backed away, watching as his pet squirmed and shook in its new home. He had to do something. But what? Gary wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. There was no way he could go to sleep. With the goldfish growing every hour, he was bound to find some large beached golden whale in his living room if things didn't improve. Suddenly his cell phone rang again. Hello? Why, hello, Mr. Jones. It was Herman. Gary couldn't recall giving the pet store owner his phone number. Hi, Herman. How'd you get my number? Oh, I dialed information for it. Recalled your name from when we spoke earlier today. Forget to mention something to you. Looking at his watch, Gary was surprised at how late it was. 11 o'clock in the evening. He must have slept for quite a while. It's quite late. What did you forget to tell me? The pet store owner hesitated and then chuckled softly on the other end. Forgot to mention to you that goldfish are very sensitive creatures. So, be sure that you give your new pet lots of attention. Herman laughed and hung up. Click. Gary was seriously scared now. First of all, he couldn't recall ever giving out his first and last name to Herman, and second, He was in possession of a seriously messed up fish creature that he needed to get rid of as soon as possible. The problem was, he didn't want to touch the tank, let alone go near Doug. From his vantage point, he could see the fish. It hadn't died during the transfer and was now taking a leisurely swim around the plastic tub. Once in a while it would swim to the top and take a quick gulp of air, splashing and bubbling loudly. Sitting back down on his couch, Gary considered his options. It was impossible now to flush the fish down the toilet. Its enlarged size would cause a serious backup problem. He thought about throwing the fish out in the grass, but he lived on the second floor, so that would require him to carry the tub down a flight of stairs, and that just didn't seem like a good idea either. Maybe he would just toss it out the window. But what if it landed on someone? He could be sued for assault. Or worse. Suddenly, the tub shifted. Horrified, Gary watched as the fish, which had gotten larger somehow, was once again banging against the side. Each time it connected with the plastic, it managed to push the tub closer to the edge of the counter. Unable to concentrate on a solution, Gary walked over to the makeshift tank, and stared into Doug's black unblinking eyes. The fish then rose to the surface, and large fins came into view. The creature's features were exaggerative and appeared almost cartoonish, its large size enhancing all curves and scales, making it grotesque and fascinating all at the same time. Gary rubbed his eyes worriedly. He decided there was only one thing to do. The fish would need to be taken to a canal and dumped. That way, it could at least have a fighting chance of survival. Unless it exploded first. His decision now made, Gary went and opened the front door. As carefully as possible, he reached out and slowly lifted the large tub off the counter. He was shaking badly now, his motions causing the receptacle to shift back and forth, the water sloshing inside. Holding the tub as gingerly as possible, he slowly stepped outside, not bothering to shut the front door. Each step down the stairwell was torturous. Every time he looked down, he could see the large fish peering up at him. "Oh, please stay in the tub, please stay in the tub, please stay in the tub," he repeated inside his mind over and over again. Gary almost cried out in relief when his foot connected with the cement flooring, indicating that he was now at the bottom of the stairs. Suddenly he heard a sound coming from the water. It was a low moan, emanating from deep within, and vibrating through the plastic. Looking down at the fish, he could see it staring up at him, but it was now making strange sucking motions with its mouth. Horrified, Gary looked away and wondered how it was possible for sound to travel outside of the water and reach his ears. Not stopping to analyze it further, he quickly put the tub on the floor of the passenger side of the car and quickly ran around the vehicle, jumping into the driver's side. He knew of a canal that bordered one of the roads that was only a few minutes away and figured that it would suffice. Just gotta get that thing out of my life and into the water. If it gets eaten by an alligator, then that's too fucking bad, he thought grimly. A moan floated up from the tub again. This time it sounded louder. Trying to drown it out, Gary turned on the radio and drove as carefully as he could to the canal. Taking a sharp turn, his breath stopped when he saw the water in the tub lean to one side, pushing Doug against the plastic. The fish thrashed back and forth, clearly pissed off at the inconvenience, but quieted down again when the car straightened out and the water in the plastic container once again equaled out on all sides. Gary could see the canal ahead and felt a small ray of hope. All he had to do was get there and hoist the tub out of the car. It was the middle of the night after all. No one would see him. Pulling his car off the road, he parked on the gravel that bordered a grassy knoll. This area sloped downward, leading to a shallow canal that ran parallel to the road, emptying out a half-mile away into a metal pipe that carried the water to a man-made lake. It was the perfect place to dump a fish. Looking around, Gary was struck by the solitude that was in sharp contrast to the rest of the city. Despite being encapsulated within a very busy, bustling metropolis, this lone road was rarely traveled at night and the darkness hung heavily like a black shroud. Getting out of the car, Gary looked around again and felt good about his surroundings. No one would see him carry the tub as long as he did it quickly. Reaching down, he lifted it out and managed to close the passenger side door by pushing it shut with his rear end. Now, all he had to do was carry the tub down the hill and toss the creature out. The tub was heavy. Doug had grown during the short drive over and was now filling it lengthwise with its large, swollen frame. Unable to swim back and forth, it simply twisted left and right, its fins swooshing against the water making silent but strong flapping motions. It hadn't moaned in the past few minutes, but Gary wasn't going to wait for it to do it again. He needed to get the creature into the canal. He slowly made his way down the hill, his feet slipping every few seconds, making it difficult to balance the tub and stay upright. Suddenly, his feet slid on a collection of smooth pebbles and, as if in slow motion, felt himself slip and fall to the ground, taking the tub with him. To his horror, the tub turned on its side, and as he fell to the ground, landing on his back, water sloshed out onto his face, followed by a large, expanding Doug. Gary shrieked and tried to wriggle away, but the huge fish slithered out of the tub and followed the flow of the water sliding across his stomach. Gagging, Gary tried to push the fish away, its heavy, slick body weighing down his chest. He tried to shriek, but the fish was now inches away from his face, when it lurched forward and connected with his mouth. It opened its large fish lips and sucked, wrapping itself around Gary's face and pulling skin into its red mouth. Gary felt his skin pull forward, away from his skull, and could smell a rotting fish stench seep into every orifice. The last thing he remembered was his vision going black as his eyes popped out of their sockets as a result of the constant pressure. Water. There was water everywhere. For a brief moment, Gary thought he might be dreaming, but that was impossible because his eyes weren't closed. They were open, but something was different. He couldn't close them. Felt like they were bolted open. Panicking, he opened his mouth to scream, when water flooded in. He could see light up ahead and rushed toward it, trying to reach it. When his face reached the surface, he took a huge gulp of air only to discover that his chest wasn't working and the air was toxic. He couldn't seem to suck it down. Sinking back under the water, he accepted that death was coming. So he waited. But nothing happened. He was lost in stillness. In space. Memories of Doug were stuck in his mind, but for some reason, he didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. Doug was gone and he was safe. Wasn't he? Suddenly, a huge distorted face peered at him through the water. It was the face of Herman Bobby, leering at him, his thin mustache wiggling and wavering in the reflection. "Why, hello there, my little friend. It's very nice to see you again. We've got a busy day ahead, so be sure you put on a nice little show for our customers." With his last human thought, Gary realized that he was trapped in the pet store. Another beautiful fish. Another cute little first pet. Another small commitment. Gulping in water, he allowed his humanity to disappear in a haze of liquid and bubbles. At the same time, Herman was greeting a middle-aged woman and her daughter as they walked into the store. "What can I do for you?" he asked cheerfully. The woman smiled back, "We're looking for a pet. My daughter Cindy's never had a pet before, so we need to start small." "Well, how about some fish?" suggested Herman. Peering at the aquariums, the little girl watched the different colored creatures glide back and forth, when her gaze rested on a large goldfish swimming alone alongside the brightly painted coral rocks. "Do you like that one?" Herman asked. The girl stared for a minute and then huffed, "Nah, don't want a fish. They're boring." "Yes," murmured Herman. "They do tend to lead rather boring lives." Chuckling, he led her to the birds where a very animated parakeet preened itself and waited to join its new owner.